Hi, everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle. And welcome to the best produced show on the internet. Well, somebody shut that idiot up. There's always somebody talking in the background here. How's everybody doing? It's the 29th of April, 2021. I said it before on one of these shows. I should be doing this show from Ganymede or something like that. But nevertheless, here we are in Sherman Oaks, which is part of California and a far stranger place than Ganymede. So I hope everyone is doing well. Tonight we're going to pretty much jump right in. A couple of quick little notes, but then we're going to be doing members' questions because I've been very derelict in that area. So I'm going to get through all the members' questions if I can, and if there's any time left over, we'll go to the Facebook page. Other than that, things are going pretty well on the other front. The output, the quality of the MetaHumans thing is fantastic. It's not exactly drag and drop. In fact, I don't know how much this is going to be solved in Unreal 5, but suffice it to say that there are all different kinds of like pre-made animations that come that you can buy and so on. And they all have different skeletons, and even though they're rigged more or less the same, you have to retarget every animation. It's tedious, and sometimes it doesn't work, and if the bones are not lined up just right, then weird things happen, and surely there must be a way to automate this. It should be able to just drag and drop animations onto these characters, which, at least in my experience, has not been the case. But with that said, we're getting a little better, a little sharper every day. So I hope by next week, if I can get rid of the, if I can, what is the word I'm looking for? If I may assist the membership fully this week, then I have no doubt whatsoever that next week we will be in position to show some more stuff. And I would like to talk more about story, just story in general. And I'd also like to do a show maybe next time about kind of about the political background of this world. There's a I mean, if you're going to go 250 years in the future, is it still the United States? And do you want it to be called the United States, or do you break away from it? On one hand, that's painful. On the other hand, that's good that that's painful. I think probably the best reason for these guys to basically bail on America is because America's basically gone to hell, and they've found a new republic that's free. And the thing I do want to capture is I want to capture the sense of what it must have been like for virtually all of the Americans in the colonies, and especially the military people, to have to turn and fight your own flag. That we just they rebelled against the British. They were, many of them were officers or British soldiers, or held positions of trust and rank from His Majesty's government. And while they certainly had cause to seek their independence and had the class and the guts to list every single one of them, nevertheless, firing on their own flag must have been hard. And for those of them that it wasn't hard, then there must have been an awful lot of things that their own flag had done to them to get them to the point where they were that ready to fight. And Jefferson's a great example of that. He was vehemently anti-British and vehemently pro-French, and nevertheless, he was a British subject for his entire life prior to signing that document from a philosophical point of view, and prior to the Treaty of Paris from a practical point of view. And I find that interesting, but again, 250 years from now, is it still going to be called the United States of America? I don't think so. It doesn't seem likely. I think this piece of territory, at least for my purposes, will be called the North American Trade Zone, or the North American Administrative Section, or some suitably bloodless, meaningless bureaucratic distinction, just to help sort out the taxation for them. Something like that. Anyway, we'll talk about all that next week. So here we go. We've got questions from 429 here on the website that Scott Ott has been kind of put together. And also, we have kind of a backlog from 325, which is it's over a month old. And I'll take the new ones first, but you really should try to drink the old milk first because the expiration date is closer. But we'll see what we can do here. So, okay, here we go. Ready? Everybody sitting down. Let's see what we got. Dun, 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 dun. Wow. Henry Lumley. Hello, Henry. This is quite a long one, but usually these are very good. Hey, Bill, with the widespread, knowingly false misrepresentation and demonization of hydroxychloroquine by the media and the medical community, would we expect to see huge class action lawsuits against medical professionals that lied over and over again about this as a treatment for the virus? How is it that they can lie about this treatment, and we all know they knew they were lying at the time without that qualifying as medical malpractice? I think it's easy to make the case that they knew they were lying to keep this going, so they lied, and people that could have lived are now dead. Precisely. I count every death after they banned hydroxychloroquine as a death that should have been placed at the feet of the media and their pet medical, quote, professionals, talking about you, Dr. F. That is literally hundreds of thousands of deaths at this point because the media frenzy did not just get hydroxychloroquine banned in the United States, but all across the Western world. Look at the numbers in Africa. There's been almost no reporting on Africa this whole time. Did the continent disappear? Bono's white guilt must be so disappointed. No, Africa did not ban hydroxychloroquine, so the media memory hold all reports. Anybody want to guess how many died in Uganda? It's 342. 342 people in a third world country with minimal health care. They did not ban the one drug that could have stopped this by March of last year. This would be like if the United States deciding not to use this would be like the United States deciding not to use airplanes in World War II. That's as beautifully put as I've ever heard it, Henry, and I'm looking forward to taking credit for it. No, that's exactly right, and this is a point that does need to be hit. I've covered it a couple times in the past, but mostly in a more just disgusted fashion, which for me usually means sarcastic and flip. I've said quite a few times. Just think how many people would be alive today if Donald Trump had come out and said, under no circumstances use hydroxychloroquine. Then if he had come out and said that. And this isn't a joke. I'm not being funny here. This is deadly serious. And when he said thousands and thousands of lives, it's at least tens of thousands of lives, and maybe hundreds of thousands of lives. The hydroxychloroquine combined with the zinc, and from day one of the Coronasphere Lounge, which I was just thinking about earlier today, but within the first week, and that doctor up in New York who was basically using hydroxychloroquine, an antibiotic, and zinc. And he said it was the hydroxychloroquine that allowed the zinc to do the work. It was the zinc that actually did the suppression, but the hydroxychloroquine allowed the zinc to permeate the cell barriers so that instead of the zinc working on viruses that were floating around between cells, it could get inside the cell and go after the viruses there and slow down their reproduction, whatever it was specifically that they did. It seems to have been I've never heard it disproven. But Donald Trump recommended it, and since Donald Trump recommended it, the media immediately, and it's not just the media, because now we're really onto something, and this is a really great question, Henry, because, look, I think that let me just say this for our friends at YouTube, I think that the COVID-19 pandemic affected the outcome of the election. It disadvantagedly, to our disadvantage. So it had to be maintained, and you can still see that today. In fact, as usual with the left, as the evidence and the problem gets smaller and smaller, the shrieking about the problem gets louder and louder and louder. But yes, not only and let's not forget that the main thing about hydroxychloroquine and that entire therapy is that it's not only seems to have been very, very effective. There are two major advantages. One of them is it's effective after you've contracted it. It's not something like a high vitamin D load that seems to be pretty effective in preventing the virus from really getting a foothold. But on top of that, it's cheap, and that's a big part of it. There are people out there who assume that corporations are more than willing to watch people die in order to make money, and I don't believe that. But I've also been surprised about if you told me that the FBI was plotting against the will of the American people, I wouldn't have believed that either. So there's been a lot of eye-opening this last year, and maybe that's what we needed. Maybe we needed something like that, something to really at least show us how bad the rot was. Is the FBI raids Rudy Giuliani's office, and this is actually a point I almost made into the third segment of my show this morning, but I changed it to the Newsom recall issue. But I've known not very well and not for very long, but I did know a relatively high level FBI guy who was a field agent, not a field agent, like a regional director, area director, something like that. And he was constantly taking calls at lunch, that kind of thing. And when he said that he was watching Comey talking about all of Hillary Clinton's transgressions, and he was there with other regular FBI guys, and they were all cheering because they thought finally she's going down. And when he said we don't recommend pressing charges, they basically throwing their papers in the air and cursing and yelling and stuff. And I believe that story. But what I want to know is, where are these people now? I'll come back to the hydroxychloroquine, but where are they now? There's no question that the FBI is now a political weapon of the left. There's no question about it, none. The whole Russia collusion thing, all of it. There's no question. And there's also no question in my mind, anyway, that this came from the top down, from people like James Comey and Brennan at CIA and so on. But there must be thousands and thousands and thousands of patriotic men and women in the FBI that have been serving their country honorably and with distinction for their entire lives. And they see this, and they know what's going on better than we do. And I want to know why we haven't heard from those people. I really do. I think I have been more disappointed by that than anything else. Where are they? And if you happen to be one of them, there's an argument that you sometimes hear made. I remember this during the Obama years with the military, that it's actually better for the country for them to stay in the system and try to do everything they can to mitigate the damage and so on and so forth. And that argument has merit. It's not a nonsense argument. But with that said, how can you continue to work for an agency that has that kind of evidence of just plain treason? There's no other word for it. This gentleman I was talking about earlier, this FBI field director, or I don't remember his official title, but he said that James Comey's done more damage to the FBI than the KGB ever did in 70, 80 years. And they're absolutely right about that. He's right. And I don't trust them anymore, and I used to. And I think, for the most part, generally speaking, they were trustworthy. But now, no. And so the two questions are, what are the honest, loyal, patriotic agents doing? Are they doing anything? And as a sort of a corollary to that, obviously, what could they do? What I'm sure they could make the case that, look, I can go talk to the press. They won't run the story. I'll get fired, and then there'll be somebody, even some woke guy will take my job, and all of that's true. But I think a lot of it, as Coconut ED5 says here in the live comment section, he says they're trying to keep a paycheck, and I think that's obviously a lot of it. And this is where I have a bit of a problem, honestly. And let me just elaborate on that a little bit. I For many years, I may or may not have been a member of an organization of Hollywood conservatives, and on a weekly basis, I ran a lot of those meetings. On a weekly basis, uh, at least semi-monthly basis, twice a month, I would meet people who kind of just having lunch for the first time, and hear them talking about how hard it was on them and how ashamed they are about the fact that, they sit in a makeup trailer or they sit in an edit room or whatever and hear people bashing the country, bashing the troops, bashing everything, and they have to nod and go along and act like they agree in order to keep their jobs. And I have a hairstylist who had that exact same situation, very conservative, and then at the same time, in a room full of everybody talking about how evil Donald Trump is, she just doesn't say anything, but she can't come out and defend him and keep working there in LA. That's the reality of the situation. And so while I think that the silence is I think the silence generates the environment that allows them to intimidate you into further silence. And I make a living out of doing this, but I certainly was well aware of the fact that somewhere along, certainly at the time I started working at PJTV, I realized this is the end of whatever Hollywood career I'd ever hoped to have. And all of this so far so good, right? If you're out here and let's just say you're a TV editor, and you've got a family and you hate the politics, and you know that if you speak up about it, you'll be fired. I am virtually positive that the only time I think I've ever been fired was on a show that I had gotten into a heated discussion with the producer about regarding the Iraq invasion. So in that case, it's an individual judgment and so on. But the FBI is different. That is you've taken an oath now. Now you're different from a regular civilian in the same way that the military is different from civilians. And furthermore, I don't know how true this is for all of the people that work for the FBI, but certainly for agents. You've been authorized, you've been given a license to kill, You have been authorized to use deadly force if necessary under the protection, under the color of the uniform, under the badge of protection. You're on official duty. You're allowed to shoot and kill people in defense of the country. And that is a very large responsibility. It's also a very large I don't want to say privilege exactly, but there are freedoms of action that you have that I don't have, for example. And so when you take the oath to defend the Constitution, you don't get the same kind of protection that a guy who's a grip. I'm talking about moral protection now. That a guy who's a grip or a director of photography, and he's being quiet about this because he wants to feed his family. That's one thing. He didn't swear an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. You did. And for this endless silence to just go ringing in my ears is very, very, very worrisome and disturbing. I think I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. Thinking about the FBI weeks ago, and I will come back to hydroxychloroquine because it's all basically kind of tied together. It's the theft of the government. The country is still here because we're the country, but the theft of the government is, I think, undeniable. I was thinking about the FBI just as an agency a couple days ago, and I thought, and this is a thought I've had quite a bit, that that you need something like the FBI. So why don't we just take the loyal and honest FBI agents and start a private agency? Just fund it. Just make it a private agency that protects America and is paid for by people, and take it public. It's like Pinkertons, or what the Pinkertons used to be. And that led me to a further idea, which is, why don't we just privatize everything? Because they get away with this because it is in the public sector. And what if you were to take everything out of the public sector? I mean, the reason that YouTube is suppressing our videos here is because I'm on their private property, and I signed, and I didn't sign jack. I clicked a box that I didn't read, and nobody else has read it either. And the reason I didn't read it is because it's written to be unreadable. But nevertheless, I'm on YouTube's private property, and I'm on Twitch's private property at the moment. And so I have to play by their rules. And if I don't like it, I can go someplace else. Not going to get into the whole argument about how they're a carrier and a monopoly and all the rest of it. We talked about that a lot. But nevertheless, why couldn't you just privatize the FBI and just have a private FBI like the Pinkertons, and have a private everything else, like, you know, and then you know, in a weird sort of way, if you were to privatize as much of this as possible, that would be genuine ownership of it, right? If you take the FBI as an example of a government agency, and you were to privatize it and pay for it, because you're paying for it now anyway, out of your taxes, but if you were to just pay for it, or be a shareholder in it, and they did the job that the FBI used to do, then you control and own that agency in a way that you never did when it was a public agency. You can make a pretty compelling case, and this is something that's going to take a lot more thinking on my part, because it seems to me like there's really something there. But if you were to privatize everything, private property, we no longer live in the state of California. We now live on the West Coast Patriots, development land. It's private property, and we do whatever that we want here. We obey the rules, and we enforce the law and all the rest of it. There's something to that, and I don't know what to do with it exactly yet, but nevertheless, I think that's something there. But back to the hydroxychloroquine thing, Henry. Yes, there is grounds for suit here. Now, whether or not you could sue your doctor is something that I think is something that we should really look into. I've always felt that the leading edge of all of our troubles, really, or at least one of the leading indicators of all the trouble that we get into and continue to get into, was just the lawsuit plethora. Just these ridiculous suits for medical malpractice. There are obviously legitimate cases for medical malpractice suits, but in many cases it started, as I recall, with medical malpractice and then legal malpractice, and then everybody had to cover those exposure with insurance. And since there was insurance, it became more and more reasonable and easier and easier and easier to simply pay people for weaker and weaker and weaker claims, and then all of this just inflates like a balloon. So I'm not a guy who, generally speaking, likes lawfare, but nevertheless, with that now, it's time, somebody chucks a hand grenade at you, you chuck a hand grenade back, right? The Germans gassed the British at Ypres. Wipers, they called it in World War I, the British soldiers did. So the Germans gassed the British, and then the British gassed them back. Uh, but they didn't start it. And so I think that since the courts won't do anything, and since the media won't do its job of exposing corruption and so on, I think that lawsuits are about the only weapon that we have left. Now, when it comes to individual doctors, you'd have to show that the doctor understood that this was an effective treatment, that and I don't think you'd really get a conviction there. The people that need to be punished for this, Henry, are the people in the news media and the people in the Democratic Party. But I repeat myself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be redundant there. Um, the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans are on their hands because they made a judgment in order to perpetuate the hysteria and the fear, and they didn't like the fact that it was shown to be effective. And if, let's just say, I want to be clear on this. I do not have ironclad evidence of the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine in front of me. I just have to put that caveat in there. So I'm just going to say, for the sake of it, for the sake of intellectual honesty, I'm going to say, let's assume that it is as effective as it appeared to be. Well, if it turns out that you find yourself in March of 2020 with this worldwide pandemic, and then you find that treating people, even people that have already contracted it, even people that have contracted it and are already in fairly severe distress, you give them a $20 treatment of 5 pills, for a week or 2 or whatever, and it's over. Then that's the end of the COVID problem. And then that means that the economy continues to hum, and Orange Man gets reelected, and so I don't think it's much of a newsflash to any of you watching that this politicization of this pandemic has been, to the degree that any of us needed more of a wake-up call. This is it. And by the way, our friend Aesop, how are you? I heard. Did I hear that you may have actually fallen, had an encounter with the unnamed virus of unknown origin? Still recovering. Yeah. Well, good on you, man. I'm glad that I remembered to say this, because there are some people who think that this whole COVID thing just doesn't exist. It's essentially just a joke. It's just like the flu. It's not. It's real. But nevertheless, wow. Dave Big Booty says, Amy Big Boutte says, Amy Klobuchar's husband got the COVID, took HCQ, and recovered quickly. She never said thanks to Trump for the advice. And Trump's line that was distorted all to hell about injecting bleach. He said, is there not something we can use that is like a non-biological reaction, more of a chemical reaction? And so, in other words, instead of a vaccine, or in addition to a vaccine, is there anything else we can use that basically goes through the bloodstream and kills viruses? And sure enough, he's pilloried for that, and he was talking about latest research on the ability of ultraviolet light to kill this virus, and he was mocked for that, and so on and so on and so on. And by the way, and we've seen this, now that this thing is safely over, we find, it looks like Pennsylvania did agree. There were irregularities. Nevada, it turns out there were irregularities. HCQ, actually turns out it does work, yeah. All of the things that they said were absolute lunacy, no. And I saw an article I didn't get to read at Gateway Pundit that seemed to indicate that there is actually some direct evidence now that this COVID was deliberately exposed to American athletes back in October of 19, I guess. So here we are, and when this pandemic started, after I saw the reports from that from that doctor whose name eludes me, the guy that Giuliani interviewed, and his success record. And by the way, I'd be very curious to know if anybody can find this information for me. But I'd be very curious to know now that a year has gone by, because this guy, the guy who was first talking about HCl and zinc and an antibiotic to, something like Zelenko or something. Anyway, he said at the time he treated, I think he said almost over 500 patients and one fatality, and that was somebody who didn't listen to his dosing instructions. Vlad Zelenko. A year has gone by now. I would like to know how many people that Dr. Zelenko treated in the years since he said that this was an effective treatment. I want to know how many people he gave that to and what their survival rate was. Yeah, because I think at the last report it was 600, over 600, and he had 2 fatalities, and like I said, he said, and those 2 people didn't follow the instructions. And they were people who had extremely advanced cases. The people who had advanced cases, he gave them this treatment, and they just got off the respirators. I remember him clearly saying, if you get sick, do not go on a respirator because it's a death sentence. All it does is push those dead cells into your lungs. I remember him saying that, and I remember thinking, that sounds reasonable to me. But when the thing started, I would be happy to have done this for everybody, but life doesn't work that way. I made sure that our personal physician, who's a Russian, by the way, Russian-American, and provides a kind of health care you don't normally find in this country anymore. He's a doctor who seems to care about your health outcome, and I'm not trying to slander the hundreds of thousands of excellent doctors still left in the country, but there's certainly no doubt that as doctors close their private practices and essentially become employees for giant HMOs or hospital groups or so on, I know that Natasha has had a situation where she needs a referral. She gets referred to a specialist. The specialist says, "I don't see anything wrong with this knee, and therefore you're not really in any pain, and I can't help you because it doesn't show up on my test, on my scan, on my thing." Anyway, when this thing started, I made sure that our personal physician was the kind of guy who understood this and was ready to prescribe it if it became necessary. And he absolutely was. He said, no problem. I wanted to know that if either one of us got sick, or anybody that I know personally got sick in the area, I could send them to a doctor who would get them on HCl right away without any argument about it. So, I almost said when you really think about it, honestly, Henry, but if you really think about it, it's enough to make you just cry. Not HCl. I keep HCQ. Thank you, Dave. It's enough to make you just, If I don't know who that guy was who hung that sign out that said, "Cuomo killed my mom." Cuomo killed my mom. You've probably seen it. A guy whose mother died in New York State nursing home because Governor Cuomo, the star who won an Emmy for his treatment of the COVID-19 briefings, forced sick people back into the nursing home, and this guy's mother died, and he put up an enormous banner that said so on. Hey, here, this is what's so great about having live comments. It's like having this enormous big brain. Bart's Treasure says, and I'm just reading directly here, Dr. Zelenko, he's treated more than 3,000 patients with COVID-19 related symptoms. Only 1/3 of them actually received the triple drug regimen. The remaining 2/3 were in low risk categories and did not need drug treatment. Period. More to come, but that's also a sign of a guy who's paying attention to the facts, right? I'm 22 years old and I've developed COVID symptoms. You're 22? Yeah. You in good health? Yeah. Go home. Just go home, sleep, drink plenty of fluids. That's a doctor. That's a guy who's looking at data and says the chances of you we know what the data is. This is not a mystery anymore. So he says Zelenko has only had 15 patients who ended up requiring hospitalization, 4 of whom were intubated. All were eventually successfully extubated and recovered. The remaining 11 were admitted for intravenous antibiotics for pneumonia. In all, only 3 of them. Okay, so there is, and he's been handy enough to provide a link. So 3,000 people. Just let me go back and check that. I just clicked the link here. Yeah, this is going to make me just really, 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 really angry. So he said, so 3,000 patients with COVID-19, 2/3 of which, let me get my calculator out. That'd be, carry the zeros, that'd be 2,000, didn't need any treatment at all. So he treated 1,000 people who needed the treatment, and of that, all of them recovered. Okay, so that's pretty impressive evidence as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah. Yeah. And somebody mentioned in the comment section they're pressing that they really want this vaccine passport. Of course they do. And we need to fight that as if it's the end of the world. And let me just say this, in a responsible government, in a government that was run by the people, that respected the people and wasn't in an ongoing perpetual power grab against their own citizens, you could make a case for a vaccine passport in a healthy society. You could make a case for it. But in this society, the one thing you can be sure of is if they require a medical examination in order for you to be able to travel, then that will never, ever, ever go away. When's the last time we had an incident of Islamic terrorism in the? If you forget the record. Actually, you remember a couple years ago where they tried to see how effective TSA was, and they say that TSA caught 5% of the total number of weapons and bombs that they tried to smuggle in, control group kind of thing. 5% they caught. 95% of all of the fake bombs and weapons that they put into luggage and so on to test the TSA, it's not like they caught. It's not like they missed 5%. They caught 5%. 95% of it sailed on through. That is, and so now everybody waits in line, and then we all have to take off our shoes and our belts, and we have to strip search 4-year-old children. And we have to do the same for 90-year-old women and let people who, in a sane society like Israel, people who would be high risk for potential terrorism, they got to go. We're going to randomly pick, oh, look, it's grandma. We're going to take her and test and see if she's the one who's bringing a bomb onto the plane because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Okay, so we live in a world of emotion now and so on and so on and so on. So all of this hysteria just to say this. TSA is still doing what they're doing, and they're probably still catching 5% of whatever happens to be in there. The one thing we learned from 9/11 was that the FBI failed us, and airport security failed us, and the CIA failed us, and all of the government agencies failed us. The FAA, who as a private pilot, I am not automatically endeared to, nevertheless performed heroically on 9/11. The FAA really earned their pay on that day when they grounded the entire aviation fleet. That was nobody talks about how difficult that is. You've got, and I don't know what the number is. I think it's 45, 50,000 flights a day. But in the morning, you've got thousands and thousands of airplanes in the sky, and they're all on the ground instantly. You have any idea what kind of a logistics issue that is, and how many relatively small liners like 737s and A319s and stuff they had to put into really relatively small airports? It's amazing. But if they do this, it will never stop. Like the TSA, it will never go away. If you have to have a medical or any other reason to get government approval to travel, then that will never ever leave, ever. If they use this crisis to enact laws that basically say you need the permission of the government in order to go from one place to another, that will never go away, ever, ever, ever. That's far too valuable for them to ever give up. And so, like everything else, innocent people get punished for the actions of a few lunatics. How many items, how many drug items are now controlled substances because some people figured out that if you smash them up into bits and you pour acetone on them or something, you can get meth. So now everybody is restricted from everything so that the small number of people who abuse the system make the rules for everybody. I remember this from long ago before I ever started doing this. I remember this is the very, very, very end of a long period of model making when I was a kid, plastic model making, just at the very tail end of that. They introduced, was it Tester's glue? Who made that great plastic glue? I want to say it was... Anyway, the sniffing glue, the plastic glue for model airplanes. Testers, I want to say. There were so many kids were taking this glue, squirting it in. It's excellent glue. It welds the plastic. It just melts it and welds it. Fantastic stuff. And I remember just as I was finishing with the model making, they started coming out with this new glue that just didn't work. And it didn't work because it had changed the formula. And they changed the formula because people were getting high from sniffing the regular glue instead of building airplanes and models and stuff. And so now everybody suffers because of a couple of chowderheads. And that's the way it goes. Yeah. Dave Big Boutte again. Looks like I picked the wrong decade to stop sniffing glue. So anyway, and we could go on and on about this all night because it's just enough to make a thinking person just filled with rage and grief. Anyway, moving on. Heather Walwork. Hello, Heather. What do you think is the future of movie theaters, Hollywood, and entertainment in general? I did Moving Back to America on Tuesday about that, called Hooray for Holly Who. The pandemic has accelerated and may have in fact terminated a large societal trend that, in fact, it's not just a trend, it's a mega trend. That we've been watching. So to answer your question, kind of interesting if you think about it. When I say it's a mega trend, I mean really there have been three things that have happened in human history. Really just three things. There have been countless wars and diseases and empires and all the rest of it. There's the invention of agriculture 7,000 years ago. There was the Industrial Revolution 300 years ago. And then there was the Information Revolution 50 years ago. And movie theaters are one of those industries that sit on the fault line between one side of the revolution and the other. Movie theaters, let's just forget movie theaters for a minute. Just look at technology for motion pictures. Motion pictures, round numbers, became effective in the first decade or two of the 20th century. So the information age hadn't happened yet. And if you've ever run a movie projector, and I was the AV guy because it was slightly less boring than sitting in class, I've threaded more 16 millimeter projectors than you can imagine. And a movie projector, movie film, is an ingenious way of projecting moving pictures without digital technology. It's a really very clever system. I mean, just because that's what this show is all about, is just meandering and outgassing and but what a movie projector does is it takes a piece of film and it pulls it into position, locks it into place. This shutter rotates. I'm talking about to project it. Shutter rotates out of the way, rotating shutter, a little slot goes by, light goes through that film onto the screen, then the shutter comes back and closes, and then the hooks come out and then pulls it down, hooks go in again, whoosh, the shutter comes around, projects another image. You do that 24 times a second, you you've got a movie. Back in the early days, by the way, they did it at 18 frames a second. And at 18 frames a second, which is what they started movies with, at 18 frames a second, you could still see jitters. It wasn't enough pictures. Your brain could still make out the fact that you're seeing a series of still images. So they went from 18 to 24, and the reason I bring that up is that's why all the old movies are look so hilarious, because everybody's running around so fast. They didn't. That's not what they look like when they showed them. They're running around so fast in these old movies. You see, like Buster Keaton and stuff, and everything's all sped up. It's sped up because it was shot at 18 frames a second and projected at 24. And when Peter Jackson did his unbelievable "They Shall Not Grow Old," which I cannot recommend highly enough, haven't talked about it for a couple of years now. He took the most advanced visual effects shop in the world, Weta Digital in New Zealand, and took, I don't know, thousands of hours of World War I footage. And using computer and digital technology, first of all, they took it from 18 to 24 frames a second, so no longer is everybody running around like this. And they had a computer interpolate the missing frames, and then they digitally colorized it, and then they took out all the scratches and all the pops. And when you see that one shot that goes from black and white footage, and all of a sudden, over the space of, it's 60 seconds probably, it's a long time. Over the space of 60 seconds, this black and white grainy image of this one guy marching by looking at the camera, it suddenly, he smooths out. Now he's walking in real time, and now all the scratches and the pops go away, and now the color comes into his face, and the definition increases. It's magic. Magic. And then you watch this for 40 minutes or so, all of this old footage restored, and then you look at the old footage again at the end of the movie, which is a very clever thing for him to do. And having watched it now for real for 40 minutes, your brain can go back and look at the original footage and do the same kind of conversion that he showed you how to do in the movie. They Shall Not Grow Old. Cannot recommend it enough. It's really, really, really good. I'm sure it's on Netflix and Amazon and Apple TV. It's. I just cannot tell you how impressive that film is. It is. Even if you have no interest in World War I at all, you really do need to see that movie. It's astonishing and moving and really art and technology at its absolute best. So anyway, the future of movies and so on. So take COVID away and all the rest of this stuff. Prior to when did high def TV come out? I'm gonna say 2000, maybe around in there. When you used to have to watch TV on a box like this with a curved screen and it was this deep and so on, you had a choice of either going to the movies or going to watch television. Television is a weird kind of a hybrid. It's not digital technology, at least when I'm talking about when television started. But it's also more advanced than a motion picture. TV set's much more complex than a motion picture projector. So you had this period there where you had industrial era traditional movie projector, and then along comes television, which is a really, I'm talking about old TV, low quality version, but it has the convenience of being in your home. So there's that. And for most of my life, there's been a pretty clear distinction between movies and TV. The good stuff is in the movies, and garbage is on TV. Garbage like, Star Trek and Twilight Zone and all the rest of that garbage. But my life has occurred right on that seam. But when digital technology comes along, all of a sudden, you now have the ability to provide an image that is as good as what you would see in a movie theater at home. That's the breakthrough. We would still be going to movies if it turned out that home theaters, home theater that's the term you need, right? Once there was no such thing as home theater. Now that there's a home theater, now I can watch a movie in my living room and it looks exactly like it would if I was sitting in row 25 at a movie theater, and it's at home, and so on and so on and so on. So movie theaters as a place where people had to go to watch high quality entertainment because they couldn't do it at home was a thing between, let's say, 1920 and 2000, roughly, right? 80 years. You could make the case it's a century of it. But now I can watch the highest quality entertainment at home at the same level of quality that I would see at a movie theater. And parenthetically, this is why, parenthetically, I also have spent my professional career watching the hardware and the software play tag with each other. In other words, the software I'm using now has a render time of about 6 minutes, 7 minutes for a Moving Back to America show. What's interesting is it does so much more than the first nonlinear editing systems that I used back in 1995. But the render time has stayed the same, more or less. More or less. On some level, there's an amount of time that an operator is willing to sit and watch a progress bar go on. And as the technology gets more and more advanced, the software gets more and more complex. So what it used to do very little of in 6 minutes, now it does a whole lot more of in 6 minutes, but nevertheless, you're still spending 6 minutes, just a little thing. But the reason I bring that up is because there is an actual end to this. I've watched this thing just like it's like a carrot in front of a donkey. You just never catch up to it. You never ever have technology that's instantaneous because you keep improving the quality. Well, there is a theoretical, and good night there, flash in the pan. There is a theoretical limit. There's a theoretical end to this, and that is simply the resolution of the human eye. I see a 4K image, and from any distance at all, I can't really make out anything different about that. But certainly at 8K, without question at 8K. For all intents and purposes, 4K, which is now the standard, you can't buy a 1080 TV anymore. 4K resolution is as good as you ever need, because if you had 300K resolution, you couldn't tell the difference. That's where this train finally comes to an end, thank God. I remember when Apple first came out with, and this is back when Apple was Apple, when they just kept making the screens better and better and better, and finally they got to a point where they called it the Retina display, because now the pixels on an iPhone, for example, the pixel density is so high that you could triple it or quadruple it, or you could make it 100 times more dense, and it wouldn't matter because your eye can't resolve anything more than that. So that's the end. That's the end of it. Is when is something so sharp that I can know, so that if I'm watching something in 4K, and then next to it is something in 3000K, I can't tell the difference. Once you can't tell the difference, there's your limit. That's it. And the human eye is the limiting factor, and that's not changing. So there you go. Anyway, to answer your question, I think movie theaters are pretty much done, and I think that that COVID in California has shut them down for 13, 14 months now. That hasn't helped, and that's a shame, because I certainly watch a lot more movies than I used to now that I'm married, and now that we've got a decent size HD. It's a 1080 TV, but from across the room, that's more than good enough for me. So I watch a lot more HD movies than I would have otherwise. But the bad part about all of this, Heather, is that going to the movies is an experience apart from the technological experience of watching a movie. There's something about going to a movie theater and watching a movie in the company of other humans that is not reproducible at home. And it's important. And so I hope and expect that movie theaters will essentially become something kind of like almost a bit like concierge medicine, that there will be certain movies or experiences that really need to be in public. And prior to the left destroying Star Wars would be a great example of this kind of thing. That's the kind of movie that you want to see in a room full of other people that want to see that movie, because it's amazing. I don't know if you've ever experienced it. It's a real wake-up call. If you haven't, you might want to look for this online. I'm sure it's all over the place on YouTube. But take a look at one of your favorite comedy shows growing up. For me, it was Cheers. Occasionally, you can find somebody's put up a version of that without the laugh track. And just by taking the laughter out of it, it just goes flat. Absolutely flat. And since I'm not really so much interested in answering all of the questions, I'm more interested in kind of following these pathways down. Let's go down this a little bit. There, we're social animals, and we're constantly taking advantage of social cues. And now we're really, I don't think Stratosphere Lounge has ever gone this far off the path, but I'm having a good time. You see these eyeballs here? You've got eyeballs just like it, and no other animals do. That's why human eyes are so remarkable. No other animal has eyes like ours. And the reason, I'll tell you in a minute, but the difference between the human eye and every single other animal eye is that the human eye has a dark iris. All animals have dark irises. But we have this white area on both sides of the iris. It's the actual kind of skin of the eyeball. And that's called the sclera. And we have white scleras. Do you know why we have evolved white scleras? Do you know why we have, you can say, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes? Do you know why we have that? It's Momoto said it's because of stereo vision. No, we could have stereo vision and have stereo vision or color vision the same way as every other animal, which if you look at the eyes of a chimp, for example, there are no whites of the eyes on the chimp. It's all dark. There's one reason why we have it, one reason only, and that is because human beings have evolved white sclera so that other human beings can tell what you are looking at. That's why they're there, period. That's the only reason they're there. If I do this, watch carefully. You know I'm not looking at you now. Now, if my eyeballs were completely black, you would have no way of knowing that. As far as you could see, given, especially since I have shark eyes or doll eyes, depending on how you want to look at it, you couldn't tell I wasn't looking at you. The reason you can tell that I'm not looking at you now, and I am looking at you now, is because the whites of our eyes allow us to determine where the irises are focusing, and that gives us an ability to read other people's expression. And that's why the uncanny valley is so uncanny in computer graphics. The reason that these figures look so dead, mostly, there's other little things like micro expressions and little tiny little muscle twitches, and your face is moving in ways that nobody really realizes until you take it away. But most of it in computer graphics is the eye. And up until motion capture, which I've shown you a few of, nobody realized just how constantly these eyes are in motion. And man, I don't know what it is about tonight, whether it's just the water or something, but man, I feel like I'm on a roll here. I'm getting away from the questions, but nevertheless. So when you just for fun, let's just do two experiments real quick. First of all, just kind of look around the room. Just take a quick look. I know it's silly to do it, but just do it. I'm not watching. I wouldn't make you do it in a room. I hate it when people, everybody stand up and sing. No, I don't think so. But just look around. Just look around your desk or the wall or wherever you happen to be at the house. Okay, so two things that you should really appreciate about that. Number one, your brain has filtered out your nose. You didn't think about that, did you? You didn't see your nose when you looked around, but if you look anywhere now, sure enough, your nose is in the shot all the time. Your nose is always in the shot. Your nose is never out of the shot. Everything you've ever seen with your life, ever, anything you've ever witnessed, the birth of your child, launch of Apollo 11, your nose is in the shot. But your brain knows that, and so your brain filters it out. Vision is not just imagery. Vision is a biological signal processing event. And the first thing that's the easiest thing to notice is that, okay, my nose is in the shot, but I never see my nose. My brain takes it out. Now, what you don't realize is, when you looked around the room like this, right? Just look around, like if you've got a cover. So I'm looking at a picture, I'm looking at another picture here, I'm looking down, got all these things on the desk and so on. What did I just do? Well, for just a few fractions of a second, I focused on that, and then I came over here and I focused on that. But my eyeballs didn't shut down during that time. My eyeballs had to move from that picture to that picture, and my brain took that out of the shot. When you look at one thing and then look at something else, you are panning across the shot. And your brain simply stops it. It takes it out of the shot. It filters it out the same way that your nose does. Because when your perception of vision is, I'm looking at this, now I'm looking at that. Exactly. This is where my focus is, this is where my mind is. I'm looking at this, I'm looking at that. And your brain is saying, okay, you were concentrating on this, that's important, and now you're concentrating on that, that's important. What happens in between is not important, it's just confusing, and you see it, but you don't experience it. So that is another aspect of vision and so on. And then two other things that are remarkable. And I'm getting to a really kind of a fun point on this because I love talking about movies. There are two other elements about vision that nobody really realizes because our brain filters it out. And the other one is take a look at something on the table or on the wall or whatever. Just look at, if you got a cup in front of you. I got a Stratosphere Lounge cup right in front of me here. I'm looking at the Stratosphere Lounge cup, and it's, I was going to say it's in perfect focus, but it was before my vision got a little soft as I got older. Now it's in perfect focus. Okay, so now I'm looking at the Stratosphere Lounge cup. Fantastic. Great. But what my brain is not telling me, because it's not important, is that everything else in my field of view is out of focus. Everything else. The only thing that's in focus is about that big. All of this stuff is out of focus. The stuff closer, further away, to the sides, it's all out of focus. The only thing that's in focus in this shot right now is the thing I'm looking at. That's because biology has tried to make a camera out of jelly. And it's done an amazing job. But as a lens, the human eye is not that good. In fact, it's appalling. If you had a glass lens that worked the way the human eye did, you just throw it away. If you had a camera that no matter where you put it, had only one little area in focus, you dial it in all you want to, but there's only one little bit of it in focus, and the further away you get, the more out of focus it becomes. Well, that's not a very good lens, but that's how the eye works. And now we get to something that's really kind of cool. Because it's not just your peripheral vision. If I put this microphone up here and I look at the microphone, well, first of all, you can tell when I'm looking at the microphone and when I'm looking at the screen beyond, right? Right now I'm looking at my screen. Now I'm looking at my microphone. Looking at the screen, looking at the microphone. Screen, microphone. If you're paying attention, you can tell that. And the reason you can tell that is because the tiny little movements of my eyes coming to focus is revealed by the sclera. If we didn't have the whites of our eyes, you wouldn't know what I was looking at, but you can tell. So if I'm looking at this in front of me, it's in focus, and everything to the side is out of focus. Now we get to the artistic part. But everything beyond it is out of focus as well. And everything closer to it is out of focus. Right now, if I'm looking at my microphone, I can see the microphone. The front of the microphone is in focus. The stuff behind it is out of focus. This finger's out of focus. This finger's out of focus. The only thing that's in focus is the thing I'm looking at now. If I move these down to about the same plane here and I look at the finger, now that finger's in focus, but now the microphone is out of focus. That's called depth of field. And now we get to the part that's actually kind of fun. All of these defects in vision, in human vision, all of these defects are built into excellent cinematography. If you have a really terrific director of photography, what that director of photography is doing is he is creating a perfect reproduction of the defects in the human eye, because the motion picture camera is extraordinarily good. Compared to the eye, it's extraordinarily good. So how can you tell when a movie looks like a cheap movie? How can you tell when a film looks like an amateur film? The reason you can tell is because everything is in focus. For example, if you look at this image that's coming to you now, I'm in focus, the chair behind me is in focus, the wall behind me is in focus, it's all in focus. And that's why it looks like a webcam, because the human eye does not do that. If you were sitting where the camera is right now, you would be looking at me and I'd be in focus and everything behind me would be out of focus. And if you wanted to look at the wall behind me, then I would suddenly lose focus and the wall would be in focus, and you get the idea. But a movie looks cheap because the people who are shooting the movie don't account for or try to reproduce the inherent imperfections in human vision. So, for example, they will light a movie in such a way so that everything is in focus, and you won't know it. It's like that great line from somebody pointed out in the comment section earlier from those amazing reviews on Red Letter Media, when Mr. Plinkett says, "You didn't notice, but your brain did." Why does a movie look cheap? Why does a movie look like a low-budget movie? Well, first of all, if I had to guess, the easiest way to make a movie look cheap is to give it very bad sound, but that's a whole other issue. But the reason a movie looks like a cheap movie is because it's lit universally and it's in focus everywhere. And the eye doesn't see that way. Now, you're looking at this picture now. You've been watching the Stratosphere Lounge faithfully for 7 years now or whatever, and 790,000 episodes, whatever it is. You've never really thought about it. But because we have expectations about what a webcam would be. But if this was a feature film, and by God it will be, and there was a Panaflex camera right in front of me now, and I produced the same image that I'm giving to you now, and you saw it in a movie theater, there'd be something wrong. And what would be wrong would be universal focus. So a good director of photography deals with the focal plane. And this is called depth of field. And depending on a number of variables that I'm not going to get into right now, but it comes down to the aperture of the iris, it comes down to the exposure time, it comes down to the length of the lens, all of this stuff together. But you can play with that depth of field, and you can have the depth of field be razor thin, or here to here, all of this stuff is in focus, or here to here, everything inside there is in focus, and so on and so on. My wife, by the way, parenthetically, really was told that she would not be, that what she wanted to do was impossible. She wanted to shoot glamour photography with a razor thin depth of field. I mean, razor thin, so sharp that if the eyes were in focus, the nose would be slightly out of focus. And all the other professional photographers told her that she couldn't do it because she's just a girl and a newcomer and so on. Because the reason it's so difficult is because in order to get that depth of field that thin, you have to have a long exposure, relatively long exposure. And they didn't think you could hold a camera steady that long without getting enough blur in there to ruin the shot. But she did it. That's why she's such a great pistol shot. So you build the depth of field into it. And there's something else that the eye does that a movie camera doesn't do, and you have to correct for it. And that is exposure. If I'm in a dark room and I walk outside, there's a moment when I can't really see anything because it hurts. But more importantly, if I'm in a sunlit room and I walk into a dark room, I can't see anything for a while. I just can't. But here's something to think about. How many horror movies, and the answer is basically all of them, have you seen where you're in a dark room and the guy's in there with a flashlight and then the monster comes out of the dark? It's extremely effective, but it's impossible. Light doesn't work that way. If I was in a dark room here in the studio and I had a flashlight and I'm shining it on the wall, I don't have to be shining it on the monster. I can see the monster from the light reflected off the wall. My eye is constantly making adjustments to open up when I'm looking at dark areas and to close down when I'm looking at bright areas like the light, which is now taking a second to go away. So the idea that a monster can hide in the dark while you're looking for it with a flashlight just doesn't happen. It's not possible. So that whole jump scare, that whole jump cut scare of like the monster comes out of the, it's not something that could ever happen in the real world. Your eyes don't work that way. That's a case of people using your biology in such a way as to provide you with an emotional experience that you cannot get in the real world. In other words, that scare cut was invented in order to do something to you that cannot happen in real life. And that is, you cannot walk into a dark room and have parts of that room be dark and other parts of the room not be dark. If you can walk into a room where there's enough light to you to see what's in front of you, then everything in the room is lit. And there is no darkness for them to jump out of. So that's cool. But when you take all of this into account, you have to worry about the nose. But everything else that I just talked about, a good filmmaker will reproduce those things in the human brain. And now we get to the fun stuff. Why does editing work? Just think about a movie, traditional movie. I mean, the classic 3-camera setup is you got a couple, they're at a dinner table, they're having a conversation. So your first camera is back here, it's shooting them in profile, it's got them both in the shot is framed, but this is the classic definition of a 3-camera setup. And so on this wide shot, I can see person A and person B. I can see they're looking at each other. I can see they're in a restaurant. That shot establishes where these two people are relative to each other in physical space. And then I go over to the side and I have crossing reversal close-ups. So over here, I've got a shot of this person and it's a close-up on their face. And whether or not I want to, I can do what's called an over-the-shoulder shot, which means that I can show the shoulder or the back of the head of one person. I personally don't like those because it makes you feel like you're behind the other person when you're having a conversation with somebody. I don't have to look over somebody's shoulder when I'm looking at somebody across a table. So 2-shot from the side, people facing each other, crossing close-ups, this camera looking at that person, this camera looking at that person. That's how you go into the editing room. I've got the whole thing in 3 cameras. Take 1, and I've got 3 cameras. I've got the wide, and I've got the 2 close-ups. And I sync them all up with a slate, and I sync the sound up, and now I can look at these and I can start editing. So again, without putting any particular flourish into it, you start with the 2 shots so people can, where are these people? If I start with a close-up, who is this guy and who is he talking to? I don't know. So we start with a wider shot. He's in a restaurant and he's talking to this girl. Great. But what happens is when you're watching a movie, you're perfectly okay with the fact that I'm looking at something and now instantly I'm looking at something else. And now instantly I'm looking at something else again. Why does that work? I mean, think about it. We don't have that experience in life. There's nothing in life that is even remotely like edited film. Nothing like it. We don't ever experience, hey, I'm looking at something, wow, look at that, now I'm looking at a wide shot. It doesn't happen. But the reason it works is because it is using that thing about the brain that I mentioned earlier. It's taking advantage of the fact that while your brain has never seen the world go from a wide shot to a close-up, your brain has figured out that when I'm looking at one thing here and one thing over there, everything that happens between those 2 things you can remove. You can take them away. I'm looking at this thing over here. Now I'm looking at that thing over there. I didn't see the swish pan. I'm looking at this. I'm looking at that. It's a cut. It's like a cut. So that's what real talented filmmakers do. And they light things in such a way as to give you the impression of things. The way you would light a scene artistically is the way that your eye would perceive it. And to go back to this example, if I've got this couple in a like, remember when they had cocktail lounges? I always liked a cocktail lounge. I kind of grew up in a cocktail lounge. My dad and mom would leave me in the cocktail lounge for a couple weeks and come get me later. No, but with the hotel manager father, I spent 2 nights a week for a half an hour at a cocktail lounge. And I remember very clearly up in the ceiling, these little tiny little pinholes about that big, about the size of a quarter, and rose-colored light. And that rose-colored light came down on the table, and everybody looked fantastic. And so a good DP, instead of just throwing light at you, will light it in such a way. Now remember, if you go backward in time, the technology gets worse and worse and worse. So in the olden days, the film was so slow, you had to pump just monster amounts of light. You just had to just put so much light on the actors and on the set just for the film to be able to register it and allow you to play with it a little bit. So what you would do is you would throw light into the scene, and then you throw a hell of a lot of light down onto the desk, onto the table. And then either in the lab or whatever, as you take everything down, what you end up with is everything in the background turns kind of dark-ish, and you get this little pool of light that the two people are sitting in, and that's fantastic. Fantastic. And so that's how you light a scene. You don't, if you were to take a camera, like a modern camera, into a cocktail lounge and turn it on and come back and look at the footage, it wouldn't look anything like what you remembered. Because first of all, it would be in perfect focus. Secondly, it would be, when I say perfect focus, I mean not only perfect focus in terms of depth, it'd be in perfect focus all across the field. Right now, I'm looking at a picture of me that's, this big, something like this, and I can see everything because everything's in that little part of the circle of my eyesight that's in focus. And so I am having an experience I've never had before in the real world, which is I can look at myself and the walls behind me at the same time and have everything be in perfect focus. If I was looking with my eyeball, it wouldn't be that case. So if you just turned the camera on and then came back and looked at it, why doesn't it look like the lounge? Well, it wouldn't be taking into account what your eye does with exposure. Somebody mentioned Jeremy Boring and me. Gave a shout out to me during their group show about speech. Oh, well, isn't that nice? If somebody could let me know more about that, that would be great. But in any event, this is what art is. Art is tricking your brain. Period. Art is tricking your brain. And using things that your brain does subconsciously and has done every moment of your life to its advantage. And that's the answer to the question of what do I think is going to happen to movies in general. Thanks for that question, Heather. That was a lot of fun. I think I would love to do like and I know a couple of people have asked for it. It'd be fun to do a series on just stuff like this. It's not so much political. It's just I'm sorry. In the live comments, it's saying that Jeremy said that Bill had the best explanation of the people's relationship to the state. That Boring doesn't know anything. Was that on their most recent show? I'd like to see it, frankly, so that I can bill them. But no, seriously, if somebody could tell me or send me a link or whatever, I'd be very curious to know what that was from, if that was from their last backstage show, whatever. Anyway, that was fun. Next up, Martin Archer. Follow-up from last week. Did you check out the animated series Primal? No, I did not. I'm sorry. I'm just spending every available moment putting out content for BillWhittle.com members and then trying to get my own animated series out. And I'm sorry to be flip about it, but I just haven't had time. I'll go looking for that. That's fine. Thanks. Let's see what we got. Dave Olson. That scoundrel. So greetings and salutations on day 409 of 15 days to flatten the curve. By the way, somebody did a comedy sketch about the guy that invented Formula 408. I just thought that was hilarious. Anyway, day 409 of 15 days to flatten the curve. It's hard to believe that the deadliest virus in human history can be... Do they actually call it that? Has somebody actually called it that? The deadliest virus in human history? Who can make a statement like that without people bursting into laughter? Uneducated fools, and heavily indoctrinated people who think they're smart could let that get past them without laughing. Hard to believe that the deadliest virus in human history can be defeated by wearing a strip of underpants across your face. I don't really have a question per se. I'd just like to state for the record that having no plans to get the vaccine, I'm in the control group for this great experiment, the way science actually works. Masks this is my take on it, because a year ago I was, man, we did 30 Chronosphere lounges. I didn't miss a night, I think, for 30 days, and then suddenly it just stopped because there's nothing new. But if you look at footage of people talking, and you set up the footage in a scientific fashion to capture aerosol spray, you can see that clearly a mask does stop a significant amount of aerosol, especially the heavy particles. So wearing a mask not only stops the aerosol containing the virus if you're infected, not only stops a lot of it from getting out into the air. If you look at the footage of how everybody talks all the time, and it's done well, you'll see that there's essentially a waterfall of spit coming out of your mouth. It's coming out of my mouth right now. Anytime everybody ever talks, there's just just this waterfall of microscopic water droplets. Some of them are going out because they're very small, but most of them are just kind of coming down and falling down. And a mask, to some degree, limits the amount of potentially infected aerosol that gets into the air, and quite significantly reduces the amount of virus-infected saliva aerosol that gets on surfaces. And so far, so good. So to some degree, that actually works. It doesn't protect you. I don't know how many people actually know that. I remember when they started with the masks, I wanted to get a magic marker and say, this is not for me, this is for you. So again, I'm a reasonable guy. I really am. And I'm willing to do reasonable things for the common good, and so on and so forth. But when you get to this idea that, you have to wear these masks, I mean, like California, for example. In California, this is not a joke. Right now, if I were to go to a restaurant, I could go to a restaurant that is open now because Lord Newsom has decreed. He's taken his perfumed handkerchief out of his sleeve and taken a whiff, to kill the smell from the great unwashed. And he's allowed restaurants to open at 50% capacity. So right now, if I wanted to go to my chicken wings place, I could walk in there. And walking into the restaurant, I have to have a mask on. When I sit down at the table, I can take my mask off, and I can take my mask off while I'm eating. But when I'm finished eating and I get up, I have to put the mask back on in order to get out of the restaurant. That's what the law requires in California. And so, again, you take advantage of people's willingness to do the right thing, and long after these are effective, and especially in situations which they were not and never would be effective, they continue to enforce the mask mandate, because I maintain that the mask mandate, they want people to wear masks for the same reason that the Nazis wanted people to wear armbands. And if you saw well, you haven't seen it yet because it hasn't come out yet, but I went off on this, people equating, anything modern to what the Nazis actually did. But that mask is a sign of submission. And it didn't have to be, and it wasn't at first. But once the data, this is the thing about the whole COVID thing, right? In the first 2 weeks, all of this stuff was reasonable. It was reasonable because we didn't know what we didn't know. Were we going to have lines of corpses outside of hospitals? That was a real possibility. We didn't know. Hang on a second. Huh. Wow. Jeremy quoted this guy. Bill Whittle guy, obviously a genius. In any event, no, they want to know that you are in their control, and this is why they make you wear masks where you don't need to wear masks, and this is why they make you wear masks when you are immune. If you've either taken the shot or you've contracted COVID and recovered from it, you are doubly immune. You cannot catch it and you cannot give it. And so there's no reason at all for you to be wearing a mask if you've acquired immunity to this virus. But they want everybody to wear the mask because it is evidence that people are doing what they tell them to do. So, if this were a serious country and this was a serious pandemic, I mean a deadly pandemic, which it's clearly not, with no disrespect for the hundreds of thousands of people that have died from this gift from the Chinese Communist Party, but nevertheless, in the grand scheme of things, compared to yellow fever or plague or typhus or cholera, it's a joke. There, in a healthy society, you would be able to say, okay, you are immune, you don't have to wear a mask. But they didn't do that. And when we got into middle of April of last year, so it was really only a month, they said 2 weeks to flatten the curve. We all know what that is. I'm not going to get through that again. But after 4 weeks, we were getting actual data. We weren't getting projections from one guy who assumed 80% infection rate when it's closer to 20%. Now we're getting actual data. How many hospital beds are being used? How many people are dying? How many people are on respirators? And they did not change. They did not change their policies to conform with what we learned as we learned it. And Elon Musk, as usual, was ahead of the curve on this one. Elon Musk said, hey, I'm opening this Tesla plant because the data shows that hospital beds in California are empty. And he had the audacity to plot a data line. So once he realized that California didn't care about data or what was real, only cared about what they could do to control people, he just said, see ya. And good for him. Yeah, this thing is, here's what's going to happen. It's already happening. Essentially, we're in the final. Right now, if COVID-19 were a movie, we would have passed we've killed the monster, and now we're in the final 3 minutes of the couple getting together and flying off on an airplane. But what's going to end up happening is the entire world will have been exposed to this virus, and I want to be careful about how I say this. But, well, let me be less careful by phrasing it a different way. Once we knew this was an aerosolized airborne virus, it was clear to me and anybody with any kind of half a scientific background was that once it's out, and everybody's going to be exposed to it, which means that we are going to take our losses. And that's just the way it is. Thank you, China, for shutting off traffic to the rest of your country because you knew you had a fatal infectious disease and allowing them to keep coming to the United States and elsewhere. But once it got out, it was out. And once it got out, humanity was going to take its losses. And what I think is going to be the case is going to be something that looks a bit like this. When it's all over, the number of people that died will have equaled the number of people that would have died if we hadn't done much of anything. If we hadn't shut down the economy, if we hadn't closed businesses. What will have happened when it's all over, and when it's over, I just mean when it becomes background noise, because COVID's never going to leave us anymore. It's here forever. But once it becomes no longer a thing, in round numbers, we will have taken as many casualties as we would have taken if we didn't do anything. And what we paid for was we lost the economy. They used it to leverage the election. They used it to enforce any number of insane policies and so on. It is probably, I think I don't think there's any question about it. It is going to go down in history as the single greatest example of the cure being so much more worse than the disease, that we would have been much, much, much better off if we had done the one thing that we could have done. There's one thing we could have done, and that is we could have done with COVID what every other civilization in history has done during pandemics, and that is, instead of trying to protect the entire population, which is impossible, instead of building a wall around the entire population, you build a wall around the people of high risk. You quarantine not the whole society, you quarantine people that are sick until they get better. And if you're going to put these barriers, things like mask wearing and gloves and hand disinfectant, instead of doing that everywhere, which doesn't work, You would do something like say you cannot visit your mother in a nursing home unless you are wearing rubber gloves and you've sterilized your hands and you're wearing a mask. And then you can go in and visit at the nursing home. That's reasonable. That's reasonable. And yeah, Dennis Nelson got it exactly right. COVID is the excuse governments were looking for to do things that they always wanted to do but were afraid to try. And sadly enough, they did, and they got away with it. And that has led them to think they will continue to get away with it. And I don't think that's going to be the case. All right, let's move on. That was Dave Wilson again. And that is it for this edition, not of the Stratosphere Lounge, for this particular members only thread, but we do have an older one that I need to catch up on. This is the yogurt that we put in the back of the fridge, and I apologize for that sincerely. I'm not being flip about that. Edward Smith is pouring his heart out here, and I'm with you, brother. He's basically saying that you know what's really most disturbing about COVID and the whole mask thing? I'll tell you what I find the most disturbing thing about it. I'm not surprised that conservatives have a much more realistic view of this, because we have a much more realistic view of everything. And the data proves that. Texas and Florida are not only not dropping dead, their mortality rates are significantly below places that are like conveniently locked down. But he's talking about this whole kind of mental weakness. It's cowardice. That's the word you're looking for. It's cowardice. It's mental weakness of the people that are so infected by fear that they can't function, and they allow their fear empowers the government to inflict that fear that they have on all of us who are not so fearful. Some of us out there, most of us out there watching the show, are capable of assessing risk. And this is why I think we legitimately had a right, not a right. I got to be careful with that word. I think a rational, reasonable, sane society would have given the government 2 weeks to flatten the curve and gone along with these things voluntarily for the common good, and would have given them another 2 weeks just for insurance. But at that point, there's enough data to modify the policy based on the data, and that didn't happen. And so even less trust in the government. But what he was talking about is this. They're not the people that make the fear porn. They're the consumers of the fear porn. They're the people that you can't really say they enjoy the fear. You know, when you talk about like alcoholics or drug addicts, or maybe women that are in abusive relationships and stay there, you ask yourself why they continue to live in this kind of pain. Why don't they just stop? Why doesn't she leave? Why doesn't he just stop drinking? Why? And you find something about human nature that's one of our bigger manufacturing flaws, frankly. And it's not so much that people like pain. It's that for some people, they would rather be comfortable than happy. And I know it sounds strange to think that when I say somebody like a woman in an abusive relationship or a drug addict is comfortable, I don't mean comfortable in the sense of cozy and relaxed. I mean comfortable in terms of familiar. Maybe that's it. That the fear of change is greater than the pain that they're enduring. And this is something I know a little bit about. I don't know what the case is for Alcoholics Anonymous, but in Narcotics Anonymous, the term is hitting bottom, and that term is used as a as an event. It's not a theoretical for people who are fighting addiction. It's an event. You know the exact date. Now, I was in Narcotics Anonymous for a year because I had addiction problems, but I was never a drug addict. I've never done drugs and I've never been addicted to drugs, but it's a miracle, probably because I've got a good imagination, because I'm the kind of person that had an addictive personality. And so Narcotics Anonymous did me a lot of good because I was an addict. I just wasn't a drug addict. With that said, it is, you find people go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting or any other kind of help, psychologist, psychiatrist. People get help when the pain level hits a certain amount. And if you kind of invert that, it's like this is the bottom. You're feeling worse, 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 worse. And as you get lower and lower and lower, then one of two things will happen. You'll either reach a point where the pain is now so great that you're going to seek help. That's your bottom. Or you will not do that and you'll die. And that's that. And when you talk about when you're in the middle of a group of people that are bound together by the fact that they have reached a level of pain that is so great that they're willing to change their lives, which is the hardest thing you can do. When you get to that point, you find that among that peer group, you have people who have different bottoms. I'm very lucky or fortunate or graced or whatever, is that I had a relatively high, when I hit bottom, I didn't have to find myself under a freeway overpass with a heroin needle in my arm for me to get to the point when I said I need to do something about that. So I had a relatively shallow bottom. I didn't have to go as deep as many people do in order to get some treatment for this. And some people never get treatment. That's what I mean by comfort. The idea of changing everything that they do is more terrifying to them than the pain that they're in right now. And that's a real tragedy. That's when you really need intervention. Not on the part of government, because the government shouldn't be intervening in anything, but on the part of loving relatives and so on. And that's why these things like NA and AA are so powerful. It's not even the 12 steps. You can make an argument, and in fact, I think the data shows that they're not terribly effective in terms of the overall cure rate. But what they provide is emotional nourishment and support that makes life tolerable. It's kind of like a 12-step program like AA or NA will cure a certain number of people. It cured me. Well, actually, I cured myself, but it was an enormous part of me recovering. Enormous. Because when I was at the bottom and when I needed it the most, it was there. I was around people that understood what I was going through because they're going through it themselves. And they're facing all of these issues of depression and frustration and rage and all the rest of it. And they're convinced that they're going to be in this situation forever. It's never going to change. And you're finally among people who understand what you're going through. And they're not just saying, well, just stop doing that. Because frankly, when people say things like, well, just if you're a drug addict, well, just stop. You know, when you say that to somebody who's is doing something self-destructive, if somebody said, you know, well, stop doing that. My response to that would be, you know, that option has already occurred to me. Believe it or not. I didn't need you to tell me that it would be good if I stopped doing this. The reason I'm doing it is because I can't stop doing it. So don't tell me to stop doing something that I already know I shouldn't be doing and cannot stop doing it. That thought had already entered my mind. Somebody asked if I'm still going to meetings. I haven't been to a meeting since 89. Yeah, I think 89. I hit bottom on November 7th of 1985. That was the morning I woke up. That was the morning I woke up crying, and that was the morning I decided to get help. That was the day, November 7th, 1985. And that was the moment that the curve started to change. And so these 12-step programs do things that to the outside seem so trivial that they're actually laughable. And this is something I would like to convey to you guys. For those of you who are fortunate enough to have not had to go through all this. I think the single most important thing, well, the second most important thing, the most important thing in a 12-step program is the idea of a sponsor. The idea that after you've been in enough meetings and you get to listen to people talk, because everybody talks at every meeting, and once you find somebody who's further along on this road to recovery than you are, they've been doing this for months or years, you can ask them to sponsor you, and then they will become your personal 911. And if you wake up at 3 in the morning, and in the case of virtually all of these other people I was with at 3 in the morning, an urge to go out and buy enough cocaine to kill yourself with, you can call that person at 4:30 in the morning, and they will answer the phone and they will talk to you for as long as it takes, because somebody did it for them. This is the whole idea of paying it forward. I can't pay it back. One of the reasons I'm talking about it now is because I can't pay it back. I have to pay it forward. I have to hope that somebody will be helped by this, because people helped me and they didn't know me, and they helped me because of the people that helped them. So, so the sponsor, I think, is the most important thing in a 12-step program. But a close second is something that is so laughable, looking back on it, and so brilliant that I can't believe I really talked about it in detail. And that's the chips, the idea of chips. I went to 2 meetings. I didn't say a thing. I knew I wasn't supposed to be there because I wasn't a drug addict, and I really wasn't. And then in the 3rd meeting, I saw a black man who was maybe 10 years older than me. I think he was an electrician, stood up and told my life story, everything, exactly what my life is doing right now. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's enough. And I remember my feet were so hot that I felt like I was going to melt the linoleum beneath the floor. It's in a church, as usual. It's in a rec room at a church. At nighttime, always, it seemed for me. And so at that meeting, I basically I stood up in front of everybody. I'd been at 2 meetings before. I stood up in front of everybody and said, I don't know why I'm here. It was suggested that I come here, and I didn't know why I was here. And I don't have a drug problem, which got a lot of snickering, by the way. But nevertheless, this man all of this pain that this man just unloaded is my situation exactly. So obviously I need to be here. So I said, I'm an addict and I need some help. And so at the end of every one of these meetings, they would hand out the chips. And when I made that admission to myself and to other people, I stumbled out of this circle of chairs and walked over to the guy who was running the meeting, and he gave me a white piece of plastic. It was a white poker chip. That's all it was. This is your white chip. This means you've actually started. And at every single meeting, as I recall, maybe it wasn't every meeting, but I seem to recall that it was virtually positive. At every single meeting would end with a small ceremony where people would get the appropriate chips. Now, I'm going to get the colors wrong because it's been a long time. But nevertheless, I got a white chip. Was it a week or a month? I think it was a month. A month of coming to these meetings and really trying to improve my life. I got an orange chip. And if you do 3 months or whatever, you get a red chip. And if you do 6 months, you get a blue chip. These are pieces of colored plastic. They have zero value, absolutely no value at all in terms of their actual intrinsic worth, but their emotional value is inestimable and virtually indescribable. I cannot tell you how many individuals I know that didn't drink or use drugs on a particular day because they didn't want to lose their chips. Because once you go out and use, that's it. You're back to zero. You're back to your white chip. And I cannot tell you how. I mean, really, honestly, hundreds of people that I talked to over the course of those year and a half, almost 2 years, who basically said, I would have been out in a gutter with a needle in my arm, but I've got a red chip and I don't want to throw it away. This piece of plastic represents my commitment to trying to save my life for the last 6 months. And so, by God, as much as I want to, I'm not going to do it because of this piece of plastic. I the human mind and heart is so amazing. It's so amazing, and the genius of it, you know. And now that I reflect on it, I realize that if those chips were actually more valuable, if they were more like, you know, the coins, you know, that the military often exchange, they would be less effective. If they were more if they were worth more, they'd be less effective. The fact that they are utterly worthless, and the fact that, needless to say, I could go out for 50 cents and buy a red chip, and boom. I put mine on my keyring. I made punched a hole in it with a drill, and I kept white chip, and then I had the orange chip, and then I had the red chip, and I had the blue chip. Kept them on my keyring. They were with me all the time. And I was lucky, and not only lucky, I worked hard. I took it seriously, and the day came when I didn't need to go to meetings anymore. And there are some people in 12-step programs who used to be addicted to drugs, and now they're addicted to the 12-step program. And that is a better thing to be addicted to than the drugs. But nevertheless, when you are at the point when you're thinking, you know, I don't know if I need these anymore, there are people there who will say, this is just your disease talking. You definitely need to be here. You need to be here for the rest of your life. You're going to be coming to these meetings the rest of your life. And there's a strong element of that there from people who are in trouble and can't seem to get out of it. But the whole reason you're there is so that you don't have to be there. And of all the things they said in those meetings, the one that is just the ultimate mic drop, really, because this whole thing is about denial and justification and all the rest of it, and you'd get to the point where you'd say, well, you know, I did this, and by the way, and I don't know if I need to do this particular thing because I don't know, you know, you're fighting back. We would say this is your disease talking, and you start listing all these reasons why you shouldn't be doing the things that you should be doing, and then they'll say to you, hey, Bill, if you got all this figured out, what are you doing here? Why are you here? If you got it all sorted out, why are you here? That's a mic drop, guys. It's no answer to that other than, well, I'm here because I can't do this on my own, and I couldn't. And most people who find themselves in that situation can't. And the day you actually make a commitment to ask for help, that's the bottom. It was the morning of November 7th, 1985. Remember it like it was yesterday. So, for those of you out there who might be watching who are experiencing this kind of despair, I will end this 12-step beat with the most important part. And the most important part is not the emotional support or the this or that. That's critical, but that's not to me. That to me was not the surprise anyway, and the pleasant surprise. And during the holidays, during Christmas of '85. I was doing 3 meetings a day because Christmas is a hard time for lonely addicts. Very hard. Thanksgiving, Christmas, that whole stretch from Thanksgiving to Christmas, that is a tough, till New Year's. It's a tough 6 weeks. But the thing that surprised me the most, and the reason I kept going back to those meetings, was when I went to those meetings. When I went into that meeting the first time, I thought, I am going to be sitting in a room full of brain-dead junkies, and it is going to be more depressing than not going to those things. Oh, my friend is here. Hello. Hi, we're fine, thank you.
Okay.
Have a good night. Thanks, bye-bye. But to my astonishment, which wasn't a surprise afterwards, but it was a real surprise before I actually went there. So if you're one of those people that are on the border and thinking about it, take this with you. To my absolute astonishment, I have never met such interesting, bright, and funny people as I met in Narcotics Anonymous. Never. I've never met a group of people that were that cool. And I don't mean cool like in a superficial kind of James Dean way. I mean, they were the smartest, funniest people I ever met, and the most miserable. But I was blown away by the quality of the people there. Really was. There were obviously a spectrum of people. I was just absolutely blown away by how strange to say, because no one was ever really in a good mood. You're never really like, ta-da, everybody's pretty much miserable all the time. But honestly, when I look back on it, I realize I just had, it seems to me, I remember it as being kind of fun, you know? And somebody in the comment section, Mobile Moto, writes, comedians go to 12 steps to get more stage time. That I want to connect that and end it with this, and probably end the show with this, and I'll do a couple more after this. But I want to end the 12-step thing with this. The reason that so many of those people there were so fun and interesting is because humor is a defense mechanism against extreme pain. And that's why I'm often, when I see something that genuinely, for me, I've got you've all seen me long enough to know this is pretty much it. You got the Bill pressure bar, right? And I see things that are annoying and annoying and annoying. And when they get to a certain pitch, I go out of rage into absolute snark and sarcasm. That's how I deal with it. I got to make fun of it or else I'll go nuts. There is a stage beyond that. There's like an afterburner stage, and that is the nuclear stage. And I did a right angle on that. Guy talked about gassing white people, and I said, we're not going to be joking about gassing people because I know what happened. I know exactly what happened where people were gassed, and I'm not going to let you get away with that one. Throwing pregnant mothers into a fire pit and having them explode is not the same as somebody disagreeing with you about the size of the government. And I'm not going to let you continue to make that particular argument. But in any event, so many comedians are funny because that's how they dealt with the loneliness and the pain. That was all they did. One of the most emotionally deprived people that ever lived as a child was Winston Churchill. He was utterly abandoned, worshipped his parents. His father was a famous politician. His mother was a tremendous beauty. I mean, she was stunning. By 21st century standards, Churchill's mother was stunning. And they didn't spend a dime with him, not at all. And Churchill would write stories from his boarding school and ask for come and visit, and can this, and can I come home? No. And the most heartbreaking one is he wrote a letter to his father saying, I just read in the newspaper that you were here in this town. He was like 4 hours away from his home, that you were here in town giving a speech and you didn't come by and say hi. Why did you do that? I mean, he was absolutely deprived. And he overcame it, not so much through his humor, although he was a brilliantly witty guy. He struggled with depression for his life. He called it the black dog, because that's what it's like. It's not like this perpetual thing. Sometimes it's just like, oh look, Churchill would say, look, the black dog has walked into the room. I'm going to feel low for 2 or 3 days. I describe it as it's like emotional weather. It's like I'm sitting on the coast and sometimes I can just feel it. It's like I'm starting to feel really low, and there's no reason for me to feel low. It's just the brain chemistry. And medication helps an awful lot, but I can see it. Here it comes. And the nice thing about surviving these things is you eventually get to the point where you can say to yourself, okay, this is going to be a rough 3 days, but I've been through rough 3 days before, and on the other end of the 3 days is good times again. So Ed Smith wants to know, did fighting the black dog help Churchill fight the Nazis? That is a profoundly good question. My God, man. That is a profoundly good question. That is really genius level insight. Would anybody else have been able to stand there on his first day as prime minister, the day that France fell, and the day that Germany was no longer 200 miles away, it was 20 miles away? Would anyone else have been able to come back from that? From something that depressing? That's really interesting. That's really, really interesting. I never thought about that before, ever. But maybe the only reason he had the resiliency and the toughness to fight in the darkest of darkest hours was because he'd been doing it his entire life. Yeah, we'll fight. Dave Big Booty says we'll fight the Nazis until the hell freezes over, and then we'll fight them on the ice. Churchill, at the beginning of the war, right after he became prime minister, within days of becoming prime minister, he had been mocked and ridiculed for decades as a warmongering fascist. Let me know if any of that sounds familiar. And just a week or two into his prime ministership, there was a strong push to come to a negotiated settlement with the Nazis. Basically, a number of people in the British government, high-level people, were saying, look, France has fallen. It's not like it might fall. It's down. It's gone. And so is Poland, and so the rest of it. He's got it, and that's all there is to it. We should make a deal with him now while we still have some strength, and let's talk before we're next. And Churchill, there's so many of his speeches. Everybody knows, obviously, the few, never so much been known by so many to so few, and all the other speeches. But the speech he gave then was actually, I think, my favorite of his, because he went into Parliament that day and basically said words to the effect of, there's been a lot of talk about negotiating with Mr. Hitler, and I'd like to just make it crystal clear. And then he said something, and I've got this almost exactly right, because it was just went through me like a laser. He said, I don't for a minute think we're going to lose this fight, but if we do, if this story of our island is going to end, then it should end with each one of us lying on the floor of this Parliament, choking in our own blood. And I still can't get that sentence out without feeling these goosebumps just come over me like, okay, we all clear on this now? Yeah, this is going to end with victory or all of us dead on the floor having fought the Nazis trying to come into this chamber. Got it? That's the deal. And I think probably I will wrap this up here because it's a good close because it's connected to the beginning. That's why people loved Churchill. The reason people loved him was not just that he wasn't afraid of the Nazis. People loved Churchill because he wasn't afraid of the truth. And Churchill had credibility because, well, aside from the fact he'd been saying this for 20 years, Churchill had credibility because he led with, his opening statement was, I have nothing to offer you but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. That's the deal. This is what we can do. We can either surrender or we can endure blood, toil, tears, and sweat. That's all I have to offer. And that is the voice of honesty. That's a person who's telling the truth. And when people heard him say that, you would think, certainly progressives would think, that that would demoralize people. What? You're saying we don't have a chance to just win this? I didn't say we don't have a chance to win it. I'm saying here's what's ahead of us. We either fight or we surrender. And if we fight, this is what we're going to go through. And not surprising to conservatives, because conservatives are wired differently. Not only did that not discourage the British or cause them to lose confidence or morale, it raised their morale enormously because they were being told the truth. And so they rose to it. And in one of the volumes of that incredible Churchill trilogy, The Last Lion trilogy, I think it's the end of the last sentence of the second book. So the first book is his youth and World War I. The second book is between the war years. The third book is the war years. And at the end of the second book, just as he's becoming prime minister, I've forgotten the name of the guy who wrote this, and I'm embarrassed because it's some of the best writing I've ever seen. I cannot recommend that highly enough, The Last Lion trilogy. His name will appear in just a moment here. But he wrapped up the end of the second chapter as Churchill's really becoming Churchill. And he said something to the effect of, and so armed with his convictions, he took the English language to war. Something like that. He didn't take the English to war. He took the English language to war. That's exactly what he did. It's exactly what he did. He took the language to war. And that's that. I mean, the mirror image of Churchill is Hitler, and Hitler was very clear on one thing, and that is that he, in his rise to power, Hitler said, None of this is going to be printed. Not because we're going to cover it up. I'm talking about as he's coming to power in the 20s and stuff in the early 30s. Hitler said, no, 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 no. We might do posters and pamphlets, but those will be to announce speaking events. This is not something that you can communicate with printed words. People need to hear this, and they need to hear and feel the emotion that comes out of them. And as a person who's done a fair amount of public speaking, I can tell you that's exactly what it is. It is an energy exchange between the audience and the speaker. And early 20s, Hitler and the Nazis started recruiting people who were good public speakers and trained them to go out and speak live and spread this evil ideology. And we need more of that, not that ideology, but in order to defeat that ideology, we need more of that strategy, more of that tactic. We need to find the people that can do this and train them up and get them out there and start deploying the English language in defense of American freedom. Oh, thank you, Chief Pup. This is why the internet is so amazing. He's got the exact quote. The quote is, "He mobilized the English language and sent it into battle." That's what Edward Murrow said of him. Oh, how about that? He mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. That's exactly right. Yeah, absolutely right. If I could be anywhere in history, I've thought about this so much. If I could be anywhere in history, I'd be flying a Spitfire over Britain in 1940. That's what I would be doing. I really think that was certainly not the greatest struggle, and it's not the most hardship by any means at all. But if I could put myself anywhere, and I don't mean anywhere at war, I mean anywhere in history, that's what I would do. That's what I would do. That must have been, the Spitfire, the RAF pilots would talk about it, and some of these guys had very little training, and they'd go up on their missions, and a number of them said, we knew we were fighting the Germans, and we knew they were over our country and stuff. And he said, but when we saw those black crosses on the wings over our country, we all went a little bit mad. We just all saw red. The audacity of that symbol over our country, man, they just tore into them. And Biggin Hill and I used to know so many of these airfields. I'm not looking at the live stream now. I remember Biggin Hill. Once I hear them, they'll all come back to me. I'm left with Biggin Hill. Anyway, those airfields or something else. Anyway, I think that'll do it. I still have to edit today's Moving Back to America show and get that up for the evening. So I did get all the new questions, and I got none of the old ones. So we'll get the old ones next time, but it's manageable. This was a really fun show. I really had a good time tonight, and I hope you did too. And for those small percentage of the total people watching this who could really connect to that whole NA thing, just do it, man. Just go. Look it up and go. And just promise yourself you'll go 3 times. That's all. Might not take 3 times, but just do it. Here I am, king of this multimedia empire, married to this beautiful, talented woman, and I go to speaking events, and I'm here because I went to those meetings. And it does get better, and you can, in fact, change your life. You can actually, there is a way out of this. So if you're one of those people, find a meeting and go. You won't regret it. I met people who fell out of that program, and I knew people who, on some level, didn't want to get better. They just didn't want to get better. They didn't want to get worse, but they were. Some people wanted to get better, and some people don't. But nevertheless, I never met a single person that ever regretted it, and I never met a single person that didn't talk about it. Strangely enough, at least in my case, fondly. I look back on those times fondly. I really do. It's a strange thing, but if you're one of those people who are in that situation, in aviation, when they're teaching you how to fly, when they're teaching me how to fly, they trot out all these old pilot sayings, and one of them is, "Try to learn from the mistakes of others, kid, because you're not going to live long enough to make them all yourself." And so, if you're looking for an example, here he sits, and just go. You'll be pleasantly surprised. It's hard work, but it beats the alternative. So that'll do it for this edition of the Stratosphere Lounge, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, who part with money on a yearly or monthly basis to keep this little dog and pony show going, for which I and my wife and all of us here at this small staff of this underproduced show are extremely grateful for, and are grateful for every single week. So thank you for the support, and thanks for being here. And let me just very briefly, thank the small group of 15 or 20 people that managed to show up. I know I've changed the shooting schedule so many times, it's actually working out pretty well for me now. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m. Pacific time, there's 15 people waiting for me to do the show live, and believe me, the show live is not like the show edited, which is why I now have to spend another 2 hours taking 40 minutes of outgassing and turning it into 12 minutes of pure, unrefined genius. Some of you will buy that, probably.